Good morning from Grace and Peace You Gathering. Dave Wells here in Rockbridge County. I'm going to read this to you today. The Day Christ Was Born by Jim Bishop. Bestseller in its day. It's a great historical, fictional, very well researched account of what very could have happened in between the lines on Christmas Day and leading up to it. This is day 5 of 5. I'm going to try to get it finished today. If I don't get it finished in this first session, I'll get it finished later today. So it'll be part B. So we'll see if we can crank it out. And I hope this reading will stir your soul. The Magi waited until the star came up east of Jerusalem. And then, when it again neared the zenith in the night sky, they mounted their camels and followed it the final few miles. They started on the north side of Jerusalem, where there was a bazaar for Gentiles, and passed the gate of Damascus, and went across the swift-flowing Kidron to a little place called Gethsemane. Then south toward the valley of Hinnom, and up the winding road near the field of the potter, and straight south to Bethlehem. The star seemed to move before them, as stars do when people travel. But when they came to Bethlehem, the blue-white gem appeared to be directly overhead. They asked the few pilgrims who still remained after the Roman census if a king had been born in the area. The pilgrims said that they had heard no such news. The wise men tried several places, but the replies to their questions were vague and guarded. The Magi looked like rich Gentiles, which they were, and the people were disinclined to consort with them, even in conversation. It was Gaspar who said that the question should be rephrased. Instead of asking if a king was born, let us ask if a baby has been born. They tried this tack with no success until they stopped at the inn for refreshment. They were told that an unknown couple from the north had had a baby, and no one knew anything about the family. The newborn could be found below in the stable. The three wise men looked at each other and wondered, a stable? A king in a stable? They went outside and again checked the prophecies of the ancient Jews and the portent of the star. The signs, they were forced to conclude, were correct. Balthasar pointed out that there was much evidence that the one God acts in ways mysterious to man, and that there must be a reason which escaped them for having the all-highest born of unknown people in a stall for animals. Gaspar agreed that he spoke for all when he said that even though the reason appeared to be unfathomable, they had inquired around the town, and only one baby had been born, and this one must be the one promised by God to the Jews. Melchior nodded solemnly, and the three men pitched the tent outside the inn and removed their traveling garments and changed into raiment befitting their station in life. This was a happy moment for the sophisticated Persians. They had, as a matter of course, been on intimate terms with kings who had sought their counsel. This would be the first majesty who would have been infant, and at the same time the anointed of God. From the saddle pouches they withdrew their gifts, adorned themselves with jewelry of their rank, and in solemn file walked down the path to the stable. At the entrance to the stony grotto, they were met by Joseph. Gaspar introduced himself and his confreres, and told Joseph they had come a long way to adore the new king. The foster father excused himself and went inside to consult with Mary. In a moment he was back, asking them to enter, apologizing for the humbleness of his quarters. The Magi did not hear him. They were looking beyond Joseph to Mary, who sat crouched on straw with the infant in her arms. She glanced up briefly, then reverted to what she had been doing, touching downward at the baby's chin to make him smile. The three wise men threw themselves into grain-sanded floor, the folds of their brocaded garments spilling into the chaff. They touched their foreheads to the floor and announced that they had come to pay homage to the new king. Mary glanced at them tenderly and held her baby so that they could see his face. Mary smiled, and the little one smiled. The wise men remained grave. They studied the infant's face as though they were trying to etch it in their memories. Their knees remained on the floor throughout the visit, and when Gaspar felt that it was time to go, he nodded to Melchior, who made a formal address about bringing gifts suitable to the one who would be referred to as All Highest. He reached behind and brought forth a small ornate casket. As it was opened, Mary turned to look. Joseph stood in the archway watching. The baby dozed. Melchior opened the casket and announced the gifts to the Magi as they were laid out upon a white cloth. There was a small packet of gold dust, and then a jar of frankincense, a fragrant essence of resins and oils from East Africa, and myrrh, a rare orange-colored gum used as a perfume unguent. Joseph was abashed. He was a young man from a provincial town, but he realized that these gifts were reserved as a tribute to sovereigns. He tried to express his gratitude, but the words died on the roof of his mouth. Mary smiled and thanked the visitors and hoped that God would guide them home in safety. The Magi backed to the door of the stable and left. They decided to spend the night in Bethlehem and to leave in the morning. Before their little camp, they set a fire and sat talking about the visit and the portent to the world represented by the newborn. Balthazar said that he could detect a radiance and aura of light around the Messiah. Melchior said that he too had noticed. Gaspar was looking at the night sky. What, he asked, happened to that big blue star? In the night, the Magi were warned not to return to King Herod and with the news of finding the Messiah. They were not told why. In the morning, the three philosophers agreed that although it would be wrong to ignore the invitation of Herod to return to Jerusalem, it would be worse to ignore the warning of an angel in a dream. So they packed their tents and utensils, mounted their camels, and instead of returning north to Jerusalem, headed east through Marsaba, then north to Jericho, and across the Jordan into Perea. There was a time of quiet, a time of family communion, a time to think. There were two ceremonies to be undergone before they could go home to Nazareth. The presentation of the firstborn at the temple in Jerusalem and the purification of the mother. The first, under the law, could take place any time after the 31st day of a male child. The second could not occur before the 41st day. Joseph said that it would not be wise to return to Nazareth and then come back for the visitation to the temple. It would be better to remain in Bethlehem and on the morning of the 41st day to take the child to Jerusalem, obey the law, and return to the cave and pack up preparatory to leaving for the long trip home the next day. Altogether, the carpenter would be away from his business for many weeks. This, for a young man who had recently concluded his apprenticeship, was a long time. He must return to his work. In a craft as precarious as his, it was important to remain in good favor with the townsmen, and a man could not do that if he was not available for work. Mary agreed. She was a tractable, obedient wife, a girl whose hours were taken up with her baby. The baths, the feedings, the changes, sitting with him in the early sunlight on the sides of the hills, rocking him to sleep and crooning him in the late hours, all tended to confuse the young mother between her son's divinity and his human aspects. He was a baby, her baby, but he was also God. And the daily ministrations to his normal needs moved her mother's heart to dwell upon him as an infant who needed maternal care and love. But when the baby slept, and she and Joseph had time to discuss in whispers the wondrous things which had happened and which would come in the future, they were beset by anxiety, and they did not know what was expected of them. Joseph seemed at times to have a deeper appreciation of the destiny of the youngster. Mary, on the other hand, had an appreciation of each of the wonders of the birth of the Messiah, but seemed unable to group them into one big mural. It was better this way because had the Father permitted her to see the enormity of the whole plan, she would have been overwhelmed in the presence of Jesus, and could not have discharged the duties of a good mother in the normal intercourse of raising a child. Another factor was that the Son of God had come to earth to be born, to grow in wisdom and in favor with God and men, to engage in public ministry, to show the true and only way to heaven, and to die in self-willed pain for all men. These things would not have been truly of earth if Jesus had not elected to be human, as human as his neighbors. Neither Mary nor Joseph ever lost sight of the real mission of Jesus, nor of his divinity. They knew. In the years ahead, there would be many strange and awesome things to remind them again and again. The human aspect was a condescension of God to man, whom he created and loved. The divine side would be hidden for more than 30 years, and when it was revealed publicly, it would be done at a marriage feast, and solely to please his mother. The sorrows were still far away. The first 41 days were sentimental ones for Mary and Joseph. They were happy ones spent in the humblest surroundings. When the census taking was over, they could have moved up to the inn because there was room, but it would have been an added expense, and Joseph's carpentry in the stable had turned out so well that the young couple felt relaxed and at home among the domestic animals. At dawn on the 41st day, Joseph saddled the little jackass and packed enough food and water for one day's travel. It would be 5 miles up to Jerusalem and 5 back. Then, after a good night's rest, they would pack everything, pay the innkeeper, and start the 5-day trip to Nazareth. Jerusalem and its great temple were like a giant hive to the Judean bees who appeared in long, dusty lines along the inbound roads in the morning, and who, after the last evening sacrifice, left in long, slow queues, like thousands of dark insects who, after spawning, leave at a common time when communicating with each other. In the northbound group, Joseph led the little animal, and on it Mary and Jesus. He saw the backs of the animals and people ahead of him, and he accepted the alkali dust on his lips and the gritty taste between his teeth as a concomitant of travel. The Jews they met were not friendly because it was not considered seemly to exchange greetings. In ordinary conversation, well-educated people averted eyes because it was felt to be immodest to stare into another person's eyes. Joseph passed the big field of the potter to the south of Jerusalem, walked up the valley of Kidron to the north side, and entered the sheep gate. He tethered the ass and took Mary to the gate of the women, and gave her some coins. Joseph took the baby in his arms, and the mother smiled at the awkwardly tender manner in which he held Jesus, and she adjusted the folds of the swaddling clothes so that the sun would not hit the baby's eyes. The foster father first walked out into the courtyard and bought 2 turtle doves for 16 cents. This was called the offering of the poor. A proper offering would have been a lamb, but the price of unblemished lambs on the temple grounds was 75 cents. In a land where the average family income probably did not exceed $50, Joseph could not afford anything but the most modest sacrifice. The mother stood timidly in the area reserved for the women of Israel. She saw many other women of all ages worshiping. Then she heard the high, thin wall of the organ, which announced that incense was to be kindled on the golden altar. This summoned all women who had recently given birth to infants and who had come to the temple to be purified. Ahead of Mary were huge trumpets standing on end, their wide mouths standing like golden lilies against the marble of the house of God. She recalled Joseph's instructions, and into one of these she dropped her offering for the sacrifice. She walked up 15 steps to the Nicanor gate. There were other young women with her. On the far side of the gate was the court of the Israelite men, and females were not allowed there. The station men of the temple met the young women, assisted in the sacrifices, the burnt offerings, the sin offerings, the drink offerings, and as the incense floated up into the blue morning sky, the hymn of praise, Tris Hagon, filled the cold corridors. Afterward, Mary was Levitically clean, pure of stain, and could participate in the sacred offerings. She rejoined Joseph and Jesus. Joseph took the baby into the sacrificial section of the temple. The presentation ceremony was, in effect, a buying back of a son. The firstborn under Jewish law was reserved for God. He must be free of such bodily blemishes as would bar him from the priesthood, and on his 31st day or after, the father must first offer the male son to God, then redeem him from a priest. The cost was high, $2.50. The young carpenter gave the baby to a priest, who accepted him with practiced hands, and as he turned toward the altar, an old man named Simeon peered into the folds protecting the baby's face, and at once fell back, shielding his eyes. He emitted a cry which attracted attention, and Joseph, concerned for his son, also looked into the folds of the swaddling to make certain that Jesus was all right. Mary clasped her hands and closed her eyes. The old man was a devout and conscientious Jew who had done many good works in his life. He longed for the promise of the redemption by God, and his longing was so poignant that the Holy Spirit had revealed to Simeon that he would not die until he had been permitted to see the Messiah. Because of this, Simeon had attended the presentation of male sons every morning for many years, waiting for the promise to be fulfilled. He had grown old waiting. The daily inspection of infants by Simeon had made him, in the eyes of some priests, a pest. Now, for the first time, he had looked at one more baby's face and had fallen back as though blinded. Joseph did not know him, nor the story of the promise. Before anyone could stop Simeon, he took Jesus from the arms of the priest, and with aged eyes on the morning sky, crooned a hymn to God. Now, he sang, you may release your bondsman, O Master, according to your promise and peace. For my eyes have looked upon the salvation which you have prepared for all the nations to behold, a light to illumine the Gentiles, a glory to grace your people Israel. The priests and the communicants listened in wonder. Many opened their eyes and saw at once that this was another in a long chain of divine manifestations. That's what Mary saw. She looked so kindly into the face of the old man that Simeon handed the baby back to the priest and turned to Mary with tears in his eyes. Alas, he said to her, the babe is destined to be the downfall, no less than the restoration of many in Israel. His very name will provoke contradiction, and your own soul as also shall be pierced by a sword. And thus the secret thoughts of many a heart shall be laid bare. This was the first that Mary knew, that in her selection as Mother of God there would be sorrow and tragedy. If, as seems likely, she thought that her enormous honor would carry with it nothing but the pleasant task of bringing the infant up to righteousness to do the will of the Father, she was mistaken. She was beginning to learn that the work of Messiah was a study in contrast. He was God, but he had chosen to be born in the humblest abode. Still, his advent had been heralded by angels from heaven. His mother was a poor, unknown virgin, and his foster father was a poverty-stricken carpenter. But rich wise men had come unannounced out of the east to adore the baby. Now, in the holiest place in all Israel, an old man had stepped forth to state, without blasphemy, that this child was the salvation of the world. Who told him, she wondered? How did the old man know? And what did he mean by saying that her soul would be pierced by a sword? She was meditating on these things when the commotion arose, and out of the crowd came the oldest-looking woman Mary had ever seen. Her face was a skeleton over which saffron skin was stretched. The woman dragged her legs forward toward the infant, and no one tried to stop her. The priest acknowledged her presence by bowing curtly. This was Anna, the prophetess. She was the daughter of Phanuel of the tribe of Aser, and she was known as one of the holiest of women. Anna had married young, and for 7 years had been happy. Her husband had been taken from her suddenly, and she had turned to God and the great temple. She was there every morning, and she was there every evening, and she had been a widow for 84 years, and counting the 7 years of marriage and the ritualistic age of 15 before marriage, the prophetess was probably 106 years of age. When she dragged her ancient frame to the side of Jesus, she peered at him and turned away, thanking God over and over. From that day on, she went among the women at the temple, preaching about Jesus to all who hoped for the redemption of Israel. Order was restored in the temple, and the baby was presented to the Lord. He was found to be without blemish. Joseph redeemed him with money and with a sacrificial offering of the doves. The sun was hardly at its zenith when Joseph led his spouse and the baby back to where the jackass was tethered. Joseph took another look at the baby to see if he could see anything unusual, any radiance, perhaps, which might have moved the old man and old lady in the temple. What he saw was a round face, dark ringleted hair, clear olive skin, red lips, pouting, a little in sleep. He saw a baby. I am going to stop here, and I promise you day 5 of 5. I'm going to try to finish it later today, or I might just surprise you with another last reading on Christmas Day. I hope this spoke to you in some way, and I pray, most importantly, that God's Word takes hold of your soul and you'll never remain the same because of this God-man who came to us as a baby one day. Lord bless and keep you. Grace and peace into you gathering. Have a great rest of this Christmas Eve.